What if everything you know about civilization began in a place you've never really thought about? Not in Rome, not in Greece, not even beside the Nile, but here, in a wide, quiet land between two rivers, a place where the first cities rose from the earth, where writing first pressed into clay, and where people began, slowly and carefully, to build a world that had never existed before, where the first story was told, the first law written down, the first hour measured, and then, over time, it faded, not all at once, not with a single ending, but gradually, until it became something we had to rediscover. Tonight, we return there. Welcome to Dreamy Night Facts, a quiet space for calm storytelling, gentle learning, and unhurried journeys through the past. If you enjoy drifting through history in a relaxed and peaceful way, you can like the video and subscribe for more slow, immersive stories. There's no need to focus on every detail. You can simply listen and let the story unfold at its own pace. And if sleep comes before the journey ends, that's perfectly all right. Before we begin, take a quiet moment to settle. Let your breathing slow, naturally. No need to change it. Just notice it. A gentle breath in and a slow breath out. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Allow the weight of the day to ease, just slightly. There's nowhere you need to be tonight. Nothing you need to do. Only this moment, quiet, steady, and unhurried. Now imagine a wide open landscape. Flat land, stretching far into the distance. Two rivers moving slowly through it. Their surface smooth, their sound soft and constant. The air is still, the sky above is vast, filled with stars that have watched over this place for thousands of years. And here, in this quiet space, something is beginning. Not quickly, not loudly, but slowly, patiently, one small step at a time. And as you rest, we begin to move gently into that world. Before there were cities, before walls rose from the earth, before names were written down, there was only land, wide, open, and quiet. A place shaped not by people, but by water and time. We are in a region that would one day be called Mesopotamia, a word that simply means the land between rivers. It lies in what is now modern-day Iraq, in the heart of the Middle East. And here, two great rivers move slowly across the plains. The Tigris and the Euphrates. They are not gentle rivers. They do not follow a quiet, predictable course like the Nile. They rise without warning. They shift their banks across generations. They bring life and disruption in equal measure. And between them, stretch long, flat lands of soil and silt, deposited across thousands of years of flooding and retreat. If we travel far enough back, more than 6,000 years ago, there is no sign yet of anything we would recognize as a city. No towers, no streets, no great structures reaching upward, only sky, earth, water. But people are already here, not in large numbers and not gathered together in one place, but living in small, scattered communities along the edges of the rivers. They are part of a long human story that began much earlier, far beyond this land, long before these rivers became home. Early humans have been moving slowly across the earth for tens of thousands of years. From Africa, where the earliest human ancestors first appeared, groups spread outward into the Middle East, across Asia, into Europe, moving gradually, generation by generation, following water, following animals, following the changing shape of the land. By the time we arrive here, in this quiet space between the rivers, these people are no longer only wandering, they are beginning to stay. Small settlements appear near reliable sources of water. Simple homes are built from mud, reed, and whatever materials the land provides. They are not designed to last forever, only long enough. Life moves slowly. Days begin with light and end when darkness settles across the plains. There are no written calendars, no recorded years, only the steady rhythm of seasons. People work with the land rather than shaping it. They gather plants, tend small fields, care for animals. The rivers provide water, but they also bring uncertainty. Floods can come without warning, rising quickly, changing the shape of the land overnight. And yet, when the waters retreat, they leave something behind. Rich soil, dark, fertile, and full of possibility. Slowly, people start to learn the patterns. Not perfectly, but enough. They begin to understand when the water might rise, when it might fall, and how to live alongside it. Communities grow slightly larger. Families remain closer together. Knowledge begins to pass from one generation to the next. Not written down, not recorded, but remembered. There is no sense yet that this place will become anything extraordinary. Only the quiet continuation of daily life. But beneath that stillness, something is forming. Water that can be guided, land that can be shaped, people who are beginning to settle, to cooperate, to build. And as we rest here, in this early world, with the rivers moving steadily through the dark and the land stretching quietly in every direction, we are standing at the very edge of something new, patiently, step by step, over generations. The first true civilization is beginning. The first settlements, the changes begin almost too small to notice. A few more homes placed a little closer together, paths forming where people walk each day, spaces used again and again, until they begin to feel familiar. The land is no longer something only passed through. It is becoming something lived in. Homes are shaped from mud and clay, formed by hand, left to dry beneath the sun. Walls rise low and thick, holding in cool air during the heat of the day. Roofs are made from reeds, layered carefully, offering shelter from wind and rain. Nothing is elaborate. Everything is practical. Inside, life is simple. A single space for cooking, for resting, for quiet conversation as the day fades. Light enters softly through small openings, changing with the movement of the sun. Outside, the rhythm of the day continues. People move between tasks that are repeated so often. They no longer need to be thought about. Grinding grain, carrying water, tending small plots of land, watching the sky for signs of change. And then, something quietly important begins. The rivers are no longer only observed. They are guided. Shallow channels are dug into the earth, leading water away from the river's edge, stretching outward into the fields. At first they are uneven, temporary, but with each season they become more deliberate, more controlled. Water begins to move where it is needed, and with this, the land begins to respond. Crops grow more reliably. Harvests become more consistent, and with consistency comes stability. There is more food than before. Not always, but often enough that people begin to remain in one place for longer. The settlements grow. Families begin to recognize one another not just as neighbors, but as part of something shared. Voices carry across open spaces. Children move between homes without hesitation. Work is no longer done alone. There are moments now when people gather, not for survival, but simply to be together. And in those quiet gatherings, something takes hold, a sense of belonging. Time continues to move forward, measured not in numbers, but in seasons, planting, growing, harvesting, resting, again and again, until the pattern settles into something dependable. People begin to build with a little more intention. Structures placed more carefully. Spaces organized more clearly. Paths widen, boundaries appear. Not to divide, but to shape. And as these small choices gather across years and generations, the settlements begin to change. They are no longer just places to live. They are becoming places to build. The first cities, the settlements begin to gather into something new, not just larger, but more connected. The open spaces between homes begin to narrow. Structures stand closer together, forming clusters, then streets, then something that feels intentional. These places are no longer temporary. They are becoming enduring. One of these early centers rises along the southern plains, a place we now call Uruk. Here, the scale begins to change. Buildings grow taller. Walls take shape, not as barriers of fear, but as boundaries of belonging. Inside them, life becomes more concentrated, more organized. People no longer live only by household rhythms. They move within a shared space, a place where many lives unfold side by side. There are areas set aside for different purposes, open spaces where people gather, work areas where tasks are repeated daily, and at the center of it all, something begins to rise upward, a great platform built layer by layer, lifting a structure above the rest of the city. We call it a ziggurat. It is not for living, not for trade, but for something quieter, something observed rather than used. From a distance, it changes the shape of the skyline. From within, it changes the way people see the world around them. The city is no longer only horizontal. It now reaches upward. And with that, a new sense of place begins to form. People begin to identify not just with their family, but with the city itself. Uruk, Eridu, each one distinct, each one with its own rhythm and its own identity. Paths become roots, roots become patterns, patterns become systems. There is more movement now, more exchange, not only of goods, but of ideas. Craft begins to take shape in new ways. Clay is formed with greater care. Objects begin to carry meaning beyond their function. Not everything is made only for survival. Some things are made to last. And as the city grows, so does the need for coordination. Decisions must be made, spaces maintained, resources shared. Not everything can be done individually anymore. Roles begin to emerge. Some guide, some organize, some oversee, not through force, but through necessity. Time feels different here. Days are still shaped by light and dark, but within the city, there is a sense of continuity, something ongoing. The work of one day connects to the next, and as generations pass, these cities remain. They are repaired, expanded, changed, but not abandoned. For the first time, people are not just living on the land. They are building something that continues beyond a single lifetime. This is no longer a settlement. This is a city, temples and belief. As the cities continue to grow, attention begins to turn towards something less visible, but deeply felt. The rivers change without warning. The sky shifts. The seasons do not always follow a perfect rhythm. And so, people begin to look beyond themselves, searching for patterns, for meaning, for something that might explain what cannot be controlled. At the heart of each city, a new kind of space begins to form. It is quieter, more deliberate, a place set apart. The ziggurat at Ur rises in stages, each terrace slightly smaller than the one below, until at its summit, a small temple reaches toward the open sky. Its brickwork is precise. Its corners face the cardinal directions. It was not built quickly or without thought. It was built as an act of attention. From a distance, it stands as a still shape against the sky. From within the temple, the air is quieter, movement is slower, voices soften without being asked. These are not places of daily activity. They are places of attention. Offerings are brought here, not in abundance, but in quiet repetition. Food, drink, small objects shaped by hand, left carefully, then stepped away from. There is no urgency, no demand for immediate response, only a steady belief that something unseen is present, that these gestures matter, even when their meaning cannot always be explained. Those who care for these spaces begin to take on a different role. They observe, they remember, they maintain the rhythm of what is done and how it is done, not to control, but to preserve. Certain moments in the day become marked by quiet action. At first light, when the air is still and the city has not yet fully woken, there are small rituals. At dusk, as the light fades and shadows lengthen across the walls, there are others. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, only continuity. Above these places, the sky stretches endlessly. Stars appear in steady arrangements. The moon moves through its phases, and slowly, attention turns upward. Movements are noticed, cycles are remembered, not as science, not yet, but as careful observation, a quiet effort to understand the order of things. The priests who tend these temples begin to record what they see in the sky. They track the movement of the moon. They note the rising and setting of certain stars. They mark when seasons change. This knowledge passes between them across generations, not publicly, but carefully, held within the spaces of the temple, tended like the offerings themselves. And within this growing understanding, a deeper feeling takes hold, that life is connected not just to the land, but to something wider, something that cannot be held, but can be approached. And so, these spaces remain, rising above the city, steady and unmoving, as the lives below them continue to change. The birth of writing. As the cities expand, something new begins to appear within their daily life. At first, it is not meant to last. Marks are made on soft surfaces, simple impressions, temporary, easily lost. But the need behind them does not disappear. There are more people now, more goods, more exchanges, and memory alone is no longer enough to hold everything together. Clay is gathered from the river banks, softened with water, pressed into small, flat forms that can be held in the hand. While still damp, a tool is used, not to draw, but to press. A reed cut at an angle, pressed once, pressed again, each impression leaving a small wedge-shaped mark in the surface. We call this script cuneiform, from the Latin word for wedge. At first, these marks are simple. They stand for things that can be counted, measured, stored, quantities of grain, animals, objects that move from one place to another. But as time passes, the marks become more precise, more varied. They begin to represent not only things, but actions, relationships. A system is forming, each mark gaining meaning through repetition, each tablet holding a small piece of the world. And for the first time, something remarkable becomes possible. A moment can be kept, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to remain. What is written does not disappear when the voice falls silent. It stays, pressed into clay, left to dry, carried forward. Those who learn to use this system begin to see the world differently. They can return to what has already been recorded. They can compare, organize, reflect. The tablets accumulate, stored carefully, handled with awareness, not because they are rare, but because they hold something that cannot be easily replaced: knowledge. And then, as this system becomes more familiar, something unexpected begins to happen. The marks are no longer used only for what is practical. They begin to carry something else: thoughts, memories, stories. Not just what is owned or exchanged or counted, but what is experienced. And somewhere within this quiet shift, a story begins to take form, not spoken only into the air, but held in clay. A story about a king, about friendship, about loss, and the search for something that does not fade. It is one of the earliest stories we still know. And even now, thousands of years later, its meaning feels familiar, because the questions it carries have not changed. What does it mean to live a life that matters? What remains when time moves on? These are not new questions. They were asked here, in these early cities, by people whose names have long since been lost, but whose thoughts still remain. The Epic of Gilgamesh. For a long time, the marks in clay remained practical, lines and symbols pressed carefully into soft earth, used to count, to record, to keep track of a world that was slowly growing more complex. But then something changes. The marks remain the same, but what they carry begins to deepen. They are no longer only used to count what exists. They begin to describe what is felt, what is remembered, what is imagined. And somewhere in this quiet shift, one of the earliest stories we still know begins to take shape. It tells of a king named Gilgamesh. He is said to have ruled the city of Uruk, a place of high walls and busy streets, a city already alive with movement and sound. But the story does not begin with greatness. It begins with restlessness. Gilgamesh is powerful but unsettled. He moves through his city with an energy that cannot find its direction. And so, another figure enters the story, a man named Enkidu, wild at first, untouched by the rhythms of the city, living close to the land, moving with animals, breathing with the world as it is. When the two meet, something changes. Not quickly, not all at once, but slowly. A friendship forms. They walk together, they speak, they face the unknown side by side, and for a time the world feels full. But stories, like lives, do not remain still. Enkidu falls ill, and in time he dies. And for the first time, Gilgamesh is forced to face something he cannot overcome. Not with strength, not with power, not with walls or armies. Loss. And in that moment, the story shifts. Gilgamesh begins to wander, not as a king now, but as someone searching for something beyond loss, something that might last, something that might outlive death itself. He travels far, across rivers, through darkness, toward the edges of the known world, and eventually he finds what he was looking for. Or at least, he believes he has. But like so many things, it does not remain. It slips away, quietly, almost without being noticed. And in the end, he returns, not with immortality, not with something he can hold, but with something softer, an understanding that life is not something to keep, but something to move through, something to experience while it is here. And when the story comes to rest, what remains is not a victory, not a conquest, but a question, a quiet reflection left behind in clay, pressed into the earth by hands that lived more than 4,000 years ago, hands that wondered about time, about loss, about what it means to be here at all. And now, as we listen, those same thoughts drift gently forward, carried across centuries, not so different from our own. The Great Flood, among the earliest stories pressed into clay, there is another one, older perhaps than any other story we know. It speaks of a great flood, of water rising across the land, covering the plains, reaching the walls, until almost nothing remains above the surface. In the Sumerian telling, a man is warned, told to build a vessel large enough to carry living things through what is coming. He does so. The rains arrive, the rivers overflow. The world, as it was known, disappears beneath the water. And when the waters finally recede, the vessel comes to rest on dry ground. Life continues. This story was written down in Mesopotamia long before it appeared in any other form, long before the version most of us know. It is one of the places where we can see clearly how ideas travel, how a story told in one place and one time can move outward, carried in memory, translated into new languages, absorbed into new traditions, and told again thousands of years later, as though it were entirely new. What is striking about the Sumerian version is not only its age, but its feeling. The person who wrote it down was not recording a myth from a distance. They were writing something familiar, something that had already been told many times, around fires, between families, across generations. The flood was not only a catastrophe in the story, it was also a kind of ending and beginning, a clearing away, a return to something quieter. And perhaps that is why it carried so far, because floods and the things they take away are experiences that do not belong to any single place or time. The story was understood not because of where it happened, but because of what it felt like. And that feeling, pressed into clay by unknown hands, has never quite stopped moving. A day in Sumer. As light begins to return to the land, the city stirs, not with urgency, but gradually as the first hints of morning move across the rooftops. Shadows shorten. The air carries a quiet coolness that will not last long. Doors open. Soft footsteps emerge into narrow pathways that wind between closely set walls. The day does not begin loudly. It unfolds. Bread is one of the first things made. Grain has been ground the evening before, stored carefully in clay vessels. Now it is mixed with water and shaped by hand before being baked on a flat stone over a low fire. The smell rises gently, warm and familiar. It fills the small space of the home before drifting into the street. Dates are eaten alongside, figs when they are in season, sometimes fish from the river, dried or salted, kept in sealed jars. Lentils boil slowly in water until soft. Beer is common here. Not the beer of later centuries, but something thicker, poured through a reed straw directly from a clay pot, slightly sour, nourishing more than intoxicating. It is drunk in the morning, shared between neighbors, offered at temples as part of daily ritual. It is simply part of life. Across the city, movement increases. Those who work with materials begin their day. Clay is shaped while it is still soft. A potter's hands move with a steadiness learned over years. Each vessel formed by the same pressure, the same rhythm. Fibers are drawn together and twisted into thread. Surfaces are smoothed, edges refined. Each action is small but precise. In the textile workshops, women sit together working wool into cloth. This is not a minor task. Wool and linen are among Sumer's most traded goods. The city's wealth passes partly through their hands. Children move through these spaces freely. They follow paths they already know, learning not through instruction but through observation. They watch, they imitate, They remember. In other parts of the city, exchange begins. Objects are laid out, arranged in ways that make them visible, accessible, understood. There is no rush of voices, only quiet interaction, a gesture, a nod, an agreement reached without the need for many words. As the day deepens, work slows slightly. Movements become more measured. In the heat of the afternoon, people pause. They sit in shaded spaces. They rest their hands. They allow the warmth to pass without resistance. Time stretches here, not divided into strict parts, but felt. As the day begins to soften, activity returns. The light changes again, becoming lower, warmer, less direct. Voices gather, not in one place, but across many. Groups form naturally. People sit together, sharing food, sharing the quiet presence of one another. There is no performance, no need to impress, only the simple act of being together at the end of the day. As darkness settles, the city grows still once more. The movement fades, the pathways empty. Light returns to small, contained sources, held close, just enough to see. Beyond the walls, the land stretches outward again, wide and silent, and above it, the sky opens. Stars appear in familiar patterns, unchanged, steady, watching over everything below. Within the city, people return to rest, not thinking of history, not aware of beginnings, only living the single day they have been given. Sumerian inventions within the rhythm of daily life. Things were being made that would outlast the people who made them. Not monuments, not always. Sometimes only tools, only methods, only ideas pressed so carefully into practice that the world could not quite go back to what it was before. Consider the wheel. It did not begin as something to travel on. The first wheels in Mesopotamia were potter's wheels, flat discs of clay set on a pivot, turned by hand. They allowed a vessel to be shaped more evenly, more quickly, with less effort. Later, the same principle was placed beneath carts, and with that, the movement of heavy goods became something different. Things that had required many people to carry could now be moved by fewer. Trade changed. Distance changed. The idea of what was reachable changed. Consider the plow. Before it, soil was broken by hand, by stick, by the slow pressure of human labor against resistant earth. The plow allowed an animal to do that work. Wider fields could be turned, more land could be cultivated, more food could grow, and more people could be fed without every person needing to farm. This is how specialists are made. Not by intention, but by surplus. where not everyone needs to tend the field. Some can learn to make things. Some can learn to keep records. Some can learn to build. The city becomes possible because of the plow. Consider the sailboat. Rivers had been used for travel long before this. Boats made of reeds, guided by poles, drifting with the current. But the sail changed something fundamental. The wind became useful. Distance became something that could be crossed not just downstream, but in any direction the wind allowed. Goods moved further. Connections stretched wider. The world that Mesopotamia could reach grew. And consider something less visible, something you use every single day: the hour. The Sumerians divided the day and night into units based on a system of 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute, 24 hours in a day. Why 60? Because it divides cleanly into many smaller parts. By 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30 is a number of remarkable flexibility, and once chosen, it was never changed. The circle too, 360 degrees, a number that comes from the same Sumerian system of counting. These measurements were not handed down from somewhere else. They were worked out here, in these cities, by people thinking carefully about how to divide time and space into something that could be shared and agreed upon. And they are still with us, unchanged, in every clock, in every compass, in every angle drawn by every architect in every city on Earth. There is also the lunar calendar. By watching the moon with great care across many generations, Sumerian priests and scribes developed a calendar that tracked the passage of months and years. It was used to determine when to plant, when to harvest, when to hold festivals, when to expect the river to rise. It was not perfect. No calendar is, but it was consistent. And consistency across a growing population is how a shared sense of time is built. All of these things began in the same land, between two rivers, in cities that are now buried beneath the dust of the Iraqi plains. And yet, they have never stopped being used. Social life and roles. Within the city, life was not the same for everyone. Not because the world was divided harshly, but because a city of this size required many different kinds of work. And over time, those different kinds of work became different kinds of lives. At the center of Sumerian society, the temple played a role that went beyond religion. The temple was an institution. It owned land. It employed workers. It stored grain. It maintained records. It organized the distribution of goods across the community. It was, in many ways, the city's administrative heart, and those who served within it held a particular standing. Priests and priestesses observed the sky. They maintained the rituals that connected daily life to the forces believed to govern it. They kept records of what was given and what was distributed. Their role required patience, consistency, memory. Below them, but essential to everything, were the scribes. A scribe was trained from a young age in the Adoba, the tablet house, the school. They practiced cuneiform on clay until their hands knew the shapes without thought. They learned mathematics. They memorized long lists of words, plants, animals, professions, stars. This was not education for its own sake. It was training for a specific function. Scribes kept the records that made the city work. They recorded what was owed, what was stored, what had passed between one person and another. Without them, the city's complexity would have collapsed into confusion. Farmers worked the land beyond the city's walls. They rose early and returned late. Their labor fed everyone within the city. In return, a portion of what they grew was given to the temple, which distributed back what was needed. This system was imperfect, like all systems, but it held for a very long time. Craftspeople worked in clay, in metal, in wood, in fiber. Their objects filled the markets. Their skills were passed to children who began learning almost before they were old enough to hold the tools. Merchants carried goods between cities. They were away from home for long stretches of time. They navigated rivers and overland routes. They learned the languages and customs of the people they traded with. They were among the first people to move regularly between very different worlds. And then there were those at the edges of this structure. Enslaved people existed in Sumer, taken during conflict, or born into servitude. Their labor built the structures we still study. Their presence was woven into the fabric of the city in ways the records rarely acknowledge. But the records do acknowledge individuals. Among them, a name that stands apart. Not a king, not a general, but a woman, a priestess and a poet named Enheduanna. She was the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, placed as high priestess of the moon god Nana in the city of Ur. She wrote hymns, long, carefully structured poems addressed to the goddess Inanna. They are the first works of literature in all of human history that we can attribute to a named author, not anonymous, not collective, but a single person, a woman, writing in her own voice about grief, exile, and the experience of being cast away from everything familiar. Her words were copied and studied for centuries after her death. She was remembered, taught, held as a model. She was the world's first known writer. And she wrote here, between the rivers, more than 4,000 years ago. Music, art, and the lyre of Ur. In 1927, in the desert near the modern city of Nasiriyah, an archaeologist named Leonard Woolley was excavating a site that had been buried for 4,000 years. He was working at Ur, the great Sumerian city, and what he found stopped him. Deep beneath the surface, a series of burial chambers, the royal tombs of Ur. Within them, extraordinary objects, gold helmets shaped to fit a human head, daggers with blades of gold and handles of lapis lazuli, headdresses of gold leaves and carnelian beads, jewelry of a quality that still takes the breath away, and bodies, many of them, servants and attendants, buried alongside the royal dead, not killed violently, but apparently having gone willingly into the tomb, dressed in their finest, arranged carefully, as though they had simply lain down to sleep. It is one of the most haunting discoveries in all of archaeology. But among the objects found in those chambers, one stands apart. A musical instrument, the lyre of Ur. Its wooden body had long since dissolved into the earth, but its gold and lapis lazuli decoration remained, and from that, the shape of the instrument could be understood. A bull's head in gold, its eyes of shell and lapis, its beard of gold foil, the wooden sound box it once decorated, carefully reconstructed. It is beautiful, and it is very, very old. Music was not a luxury in Sumer. It was woven into daily life, into the rituals of the temple, into the celebrations of harvest and planting, into the quiet evenings at the end of a long day. Harps and lyres were among the most valued objects a person could possess. Musicians held high standing in the temple hierarchy. Songs were composed, some were written down, hymns to gods and goddesses, laments for the dead, praise for kings, and the writing down of music is itself remarkable. It is one of the earliest attempts anywhere in the world to preserve not just words, but sound. The impulse behind it is the same impulse behind all of writing, all of art, all of record keeping, to hold something that would otherwise be lost, to say, this existed, this was felt, this was beautiful, and I do not want it to disappear. And in the royal tombs of Ur, buried alongside their owners 4,000 years ago, these objects waited, in the dark, in the silence of the earth, until hands moved carefully through the soil and found them again. Trade, growth, and connection beyond the edges of the city. Movement begins to stretch further than before, not in large groups, not all at once, but in steady, deliberate journeys. Paths that once led only to nearby fields now continue outward, following the line of the river, or tracing routes across dry, open land. The cities have grown, and with growth comes need. There is grain in abundance, but little stone. Clay is plentiful, but strong timber is scarce. Metal is not found here in any great quantity. And so, people begin to travel. Boats move along the rivers, long and narrow, guided by poles and current. They carry goods carefully stored, sealed containers, bundles wrapped and balanced against the slow movement of the water. On land, caravans form. Animals walk in line, each carrying a small part of the load. The pace is unhurried, but continuous. Day after day, distance is covered. They travel toward regions where the land offers something different. To the north, there are forests. To the east, stone. To the west, routes that lead toward distant coasts, and with each journey, connections begin to form, not only between places, but between people. Objects arrive that were not made here, smooth stone shaped elsewhere, wood with a different grain, materials that feel unfamiliar in the hand. They are examined, handled, understood slowly. But what moves along these routes is not limited to objects. Ideas travel as well. Ways of shaping materials, ways of organizing work, ways of thinking about distance and exchange. These are not taught in a single moment. They arrive gradually, carried in memory, shared in passing, absorbed without announcement. The cities are no longer isolated. They are part of something wider, a network that extends beyond what can be seen from within the walls. Paths become known, journeys become expected. There are places now where people meet regularly, not by chance, but by design. Points along the routes where movement pauses, then continues. And through all of this, the rivers remain central. They carry more than water. They carry connection from one settlement to another, linking lives that will never meet directly, but are still part of the same unfolding world. Not just cities, but a system of cities. Not just survival, but exchange. Not just presence, but reach. Sargon and the First Empire. As the cities grow stronger within their own boundaries, the space between them begins to change. Cities begin to look outward, not only with curiosity, but with awareness. Who controls the water upstream? Who has access to certain materials? Who moves freely along the established routes? These questions do not always lead to agreement. Walls that once marked identity begin to take on another purpose. They are strengthened. Open spaces near the city's edges are watched more closely, and eventually, one figure emerges whose presence shifts the balance in a new way. A leader from the north, Sargon of Akkad. Very little is certain about his origins. Later stories describe him as a man who rose from humble beginnings, a cup-bearer to a local king who eventually came to power through his own will and ability. Whether or not those stories are exact, what he achieved was genuinely new. He brought together many cities through movement, through coordination, through a vision that extended beyond local identity. Cities that once stood independently became part of something larger, not erased, but connected under a shared direction. For the first time, control stretched across multiple regions in a continuous way. Communication had to travel further. Decisions had to account for distance. A language, Akkadian, began to serve as a shared tongue for administration and trade across the whole system. Sargon ruled for more than 50 years. His empire lasted through several of his descendants. including his grandson Naram-Sin, who called himself king of the 4 quarters of the world. It was not a modest title, but it reflected something real. For the first time in human history, a single political authority extended across a vast and varied landscape. And even when that empire eventually fractured, the idea did not disappear that cities can be linked, that authority can extend across distance, that a system larger than any one city is possible. Once imagined, it could not be unimagined. Slow decline over many generations. The world that had formed in the southern plains begins to change in ways that are not immediately clear. The cities still stand. People still move through their streets. Work continues. But beneath that continuity, conditions are shifting. The land which once supported steady cultivation is slowly altered by the very systems that made growth possible. Water drawn across the fields through repeated irrigation leaves behind traces within the soil. Over many seasons, salt begins to gather. It settles quietly, not visible at first, but increasingly present. Certain crops no longer grow as they once did. Yields decline, farmers adjust, turning to more resilient grains. But even these are affected as the years pass. The ground becomes less responsive. At the same time, the rivers continue their long movement across the plains. They do not remain fixed. Channels shift. Banks erode. Floods arrive with different timing. Irrigation systems that once functioned with balance require more effort to maintain. More labor, more coordination. Beyond the fields, the political structure continues to evolve. The earlier unity established under the Akkadian rulers does not remain stable. After the reign of Naram-Sin, pressures begin to build. Control weakens. Communication stretches thin across distance. Cities that were once connected start to reassert their independence. New groups move into the region, but even within this period of uncertainty, recovery begins. In the southern cities, a new phase emerges. What is now called the Third Dynasty of under rulers such as Namu. Organization returns. Administration becomes more structured. Records are kept with greater detail. Ziggurats are constructed with precision. There is a sense for a time of renewal. But this phase too does not remain. Pressure begins again from beyond the southern plains. Groups from the west, often referred to as Amorites, move into the region. At the same time, a new force rises from the east, the Elamites. They move toward the southern cities, and in time, the city of is taken. Its structures are damaged, its leadership displaced, and with that, the final political structure that had sustained Sumerian identity comes to an end. The cities do not vanish, they continue to be inhabited, used, adapted, but the culture that had defined them begins to change. Sumerian, once spoken in daily life, is gradually replaced by Akkadian dialects. It does not disappear immediately. It remains in written form, used by scribes, preserved in records and instruction. But over time, it becomes something studied rather than spoken. And so the world that began here does not collapse in a single moment. It transforms. Its systems are absorbed. Its knowledge is carried forward. But its original form, its distinct identity, fades into the larger currents of history. Legacy. Long after the earliest cities of the southern plains have changed their form, what was created there continues to move forward, not preserved exactly, but carried, adapted, built upon. Power shifts northward. The city of Babylon begins to rise. Here, earlier knowledge is not replaced, but reorganized. In the 18th century BC, a ruler named Hammurabi establishes one of the earliest known legal codes written in a structured and public form. 282 laws inscribed on a great stone pillar, not hidden from view, but displayed. They cover contracts, property, wages, marriage, assault, trade, the responsibilities of builders and surgeons and merchants. They are not gentle laws. Some are harsh by any modern measure, but the principle behind them is something new. That rules can be written down, that they apply to everyone they describe, that they can be read by anyone who can read. The idea that justice should be visible, consistent, not simply a matter of whoever holds the most power in the room. This idea did not begin with Hammurabi. It grew from the record-keeping and administrative structures first developed in the Sumerian cities hundreds of years before. He extended what already existed. The 60-minute hour is still with us, unchanged from the Sumerian system. Every clock in the world runs on a division of time first established between these rivers. The circle divided into 360 degrees. The same origin. Mathematical tables from ancient Mesopotamia show calculations for area and volume, for square roots and cubes, for problems that would not appear in European mathematics for another 2,000 years. The observation of the night sky that began in the temples of Ur and Uruk became the foundation for astronomy. The star catalogues kept by Babylonian priests were used by Greek astronomers, who used them to build systems that shaped how the Western world understood the heavens for nearly 2,000 years. The stories too continued their journey. The account of Gilgamesh was copied across generations, its lines rewritten, translated, reinterpreted, found in fragments across the ancient Middle East. When tablets bearing its text were discovered in the 19th century, and scholars recognized similarities to stories in the Bible, it caused a sensation. Not because it disproved anything, but because it showed how old these stories are, how far they have traveled, how connected the ancient world was, in ways we had not imagined, and the flood story, present in Sumerian tablets more than 1,000 years before it appears in any other form, carried forward, translated, retold, still told today. All of this began here, in cities that are now mounds of earth in the Iraqi desert, in clay tablets held carefully in museum drawers, in marks pressed by reeds into soft earth by people who did not know they were beginning something that would never quite end. And as we sit quietly with this, with the slow continuity of ideas moving through thousands of years, we begin to understand something important. The beginning is never truly left behind. It continues in ways that are often unseen, but always present. In the way time is measured, in the way laws are written, in the way a story begins, is remembered, and told again. And now, as the movement of centuries begins to quiet, we return, not to the height of the cities, not to the structures that once stood, but to the land itself, wide, open, and still. The rivers continue their slow and steady course, just as they always have, flowing through the plains, unchanged in their presence, even as everything around them has shifted and reshaped and moved on. There are no voices here now, no footsteps along the pathways, only the soft movement of water and the open sky above. The cities that once rose here, with their walls and rising forms, have long since returned to the earth, layer by layer, their outlines softened, their presence absorbed back into the land from which they came. And yet, something remains, not in stone, not in form, but in what was set into motion, a beginning that continues to unfold far beyond its place of origin. And as you rest here, in this quiet space between what was and what has followed, there is nothing you need to hold on to, no detail you need to remember, no sequence you need to follow, only the feeling of having moved gently through a long passage of time. Let your breathing slow, not by effort, but naturally. A soft breath in and a slow breath out. Allow your body to settle a little deeper into where you are. The weight of your shoulders easing, your hands resting, your thoughts beginning to drift without direction. There is no need to stay with the story now. It has already done its work. Like water moving through the land, it has passed through quietly, leaving something behind without asking to be held. And just as those early cities rose slowly over generations, without urgency, without force, rest comes in the same way. Not something to reach for, not something to create, only something to allow. If your mind wanders, let it wander. If it returns, let it return. There is no right place for it to be, only this moment, steady, unhurried, and at ease. And somewhere, far back in time, beneath the same sky. Those early lives continued in their own quiet rhythm, not knowing what would come, not needing to, simply moving through each day as it arrived. And in that, there is something familiar, something that remains true even now. You are here, breathing, resting, part of a long and continuous story that does not need to be understood to be felt. And as the night settles around you, soft and undisturbed, you can allow yourself to drift a little further. There is nothing left to follow, nothing left to do, only the quiet space of rest and time stretching gently ahead without urgency. Sleep will come when it is ready, and when it does, you can let it arrive without resistance. For now, just remain here, in this calm and steady stillness, as everything gradually comes to rest. Sleep well. Good night.